Welcome to our webinar about vitamin D. Tomorrow, you will all receive a link to this video, so don't worry about taking notes. Please sit back and enjoy. Before we begin, we would like to remind our audience that we are presenting business-to-business information which is not intended for the final consumer. Although we will be discussing recent research about vitamin D and related health claims, we would like to remind you that we are not providing health or medical advice. We would recommend any health-related questions be addressed to your doctor, and any health claims for products should be checked with your local regulatory authority. Today, we will review vitamin D and its role in our immunity, the link that has been made between vitamin D and COVID-19. We'll review the implications of global vitamin D status. Then we'll review our Lallemand brand of vitamin D. We're excited to tell you about the new extended use of Lallemand's vitamin D yeast. And finally, we'll present some market data from Mintel regarding the health market from the consumer perspective. Let's first look at vitamin D and its effect on the immune system. As a review and reminder, vitamin D is known as the sunshine vitamin because it is produced in our own skin when we are exposed to UV light. Vitamin D is actually a group of fat-soluble vitamins that behave like hormones in several ways. You may already be familiar with the different forms of vitamin D, including vitamin D2, known as ergocalciferol, or vitamin D3, known as cholecalciferol. As with all vitamins, vitamin D is critical for human health. Deficiency could result in any of a number of diseases, including hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, stroke, osteoporosis, periodontal disease, and others. Recent research shows that insufficient blood levels of vitamin D are linked to COVID-19 infection and severity of this disease. Vitamin D3 develops naturally in human skin and sheep's wool when these are exposed to the sun. We can get vitamin D3 through our diet from sources such as oily fish, which accumulate vitamin D3 in their tissues from their food source of plankton. We also take supplements which contain vitamin D3 extracted from lanolin in wool. Vegan dietary sources include vitamin D2 from baker's yeast, which naturally develops D2 when exposed to UV light, or mushrooms. D2 and D3 can be consumed as dietary supplements or in supplemented foods. Globally, intake is insufficient for ideal health. Not only has NASA determined that since the 1970s there has been an increase in the amount of solar radiation that is reaching Earth, but at the same time, people are protecting themselves more from the sun, either by wearing clothing as covering or through the use of sunscreen or sunblock. Overall, we are getting less vitamin D naturally through sun exposure. Why is vitamin D so important? What does it do in the body? It regulates calcium absorption, which affects the mineralization of bone and teeth. It's critical for calcium and phosphorus balance. And vitamin D binds to vitamin D receptors on a variety of tissues where it exerts a biological effect, including on cells of the immune system. Vitamin D receptors are found on most cells of the immune system. Here, It modulates immune reactions during inflammatory response and stimulates immune cell proliferation and cytokine production. These cytokines are responsible for cell signaling throughout the immune system. The biological effects of vitamin D have been well documented, and because of this, it has authorized health claims in the EU and in the USA. In the EU, we can clearly talk about how vitamin D contributes to the normal function of the immune system, including in children, normal absorption and utilization of calcium and phosphorus, normal blood calcium levels, and the maintenance of normal bones, muscle function, and normal teeth, among other claims. In the US, although no claims can be made about immunity, we can talk about how adequate calcium and vitamin D may reduce the risk of osteoporosis. In the past year, as COVID impacted the entire world, many studies were done to determine the risk factors for this new virus. It became obvious that vitamin D plays a huge role in the experience of people who catch COVID-19. Over and over again, studies showed that insufficient vitamin D in the blood played a role in the severity of this respiratory disease. Just as a reminder, we are not doctors or clinicians giving this presentation today, and we have not done any of these studies, but we are constantly reviewing the research because we are producers of vitamin D yeast for supplements and food. From the published data, it was exciting for us to learn that vitamin D may have a potential role as a supplement to prevent infection by COVID-19, to reduce the severity of COVID-19 infection, and to reduce the risk of death from COVID-19 infection. In the next few slides, we'll review the link between vitamin D and COVID-19. So just as a reminder of what exactly COVID-19 is, it's a respiratory disorder caused by severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, SARS-CoV-2. It's from the same coronavirus family responsible for severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, which was first reported in Asia in February 2003, and also Middle East respiratory syndrome, MERS, which was first reported in Saudi Arabia in 2012. To date, there is no proven cure for this virus, so prevention remains the best strategy to combat COVID-19. After the pandemic was first announced, the scientific community was scrambling to determine the risk factors and treatments. During their research, it became clear that the vitamin D status of COVID-19 patients had an effect on their experience. In 2021, many study reviews, which examined multiple studies together, showed a significant relationship between vitamin D concentration in the blood and SARS-CoV-2 infection, COVID-19 composite severity, and mortality. One of the first groups of scientists to bring attention to vitamin D and COVID were a group called Vitamin D UK. In September 2020, they published a video of a 90-minute Zoom presentation they did to present results on this topic in order to convince the UK government and other governments around the world to increase their recommended daily intake for vitamin D to 4,000 IU. A few months later, in an open letter to world governments, 120 experts from the UK, US, and EU reported that there is clear scientific evidence that vitamin D reduces COVID-19 infections, hospitalizations, and deaths. They also called for increased vitamin D intake to 4,000 IU per day for healthy adults. Both groups discussed how higher vitamin D blood levels are associated with lower rates of SARS-CoV-2 infection. Higher vitamin D levels are associated with lower risk of a severe case of COVID-19. Intervention studies, including randomized controlled trials, indicate that vitamin D can be a very effective treatment, and many papers reveal several biological mechanisms by which vitamin D influences COVID-19, and modeling studies show that vitamin D's influence on COVID-19 is very likely causal, not just a correlation. Most conclusions were the same. SARS-CoV-2 positivity is strongly and inversely associated with circulating vitamin D blood levels, a relationship that persists across latitudes, races and ethnicities, sexes, and age ranges. Vitamin D sufficiency increases resistance to viral infections and helps prevent every symptom of severe COVID-19 that results in fatalities. They show that vitamin D deficiency can also explain every major risk factor, including the mystery of why children seem relatively protected and why males, the elderly, and people with naturally melanin-rich skin are especially vulnerable. It's clear that as a population, we're not getting enough vitamin D. Although the world has been severely impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, it is critical to remember that vitamin D is not specific for COVID-19. Vitamin D supports the overall immune system to protect against all types of viruses. The intense situation of the pandemic simply highlighted the importance of this vitamin for immune health in general. Protection against common seasonal viruses is just as important in our global community. However, globally, people are still not getting enough vitamin D. Over the past 30 years, the increasing prevalence of inadequate vitamin D status has been reported in different populations worldwide. Emerging evidence indicates that low vitamin D concentrations are alarmingly common, also in low latitude countries, despite the abundance of sunlight. Vitamin D supplementation and/or food fortification is increasingly being discussed worldwide as an effective strategy to tackle low vitamin D levels. This is particularly important since natural food sources are limited in most countries. Vitamin D supplementation has been gaining popularity as well as mandatory food fortification programs. Finland has taken the lead, and Canada also has some mandates for fortification. In the United States, fortification is optional but allowed. At Lallemand, we offer vitamin D ingredients suitable for dietary supplements or food fortification. We are the first company to produce both active vitamin D yeast for baking and inactive vitamin D yeast for use in supplements and food. You may already be familiar with our Lallemand brand of vitamin D yeast. It is a natural, gluten-free, and vegan form of vitamin D produced in non-GMO yeast. It is inactive yeast, so it's suitable for dietary supplements and food fortification. It's available in two concentrations, 8,000 IU and 20,000 IU. In the next few slides, we'll review some new regulations expanding the use of our vitamin D yeast in foods. Lallemand has an active history with the EFSA for vitamin D yeast. In 2014, we obtained the first EU authorization of Lallemand vitamin D yeast as the concentrated form of active yeast for baking as a novel food. In 2018, we obtained the first extension of use of vitamin D yeast, authorizing its use in its inactive form, our Lallemand brand, use of vitamin D yeast along with other vitamins for the fermentation of other foods, and a wider range for the specification. In May of 2020, we initiated the dossier to expand the range of food products in which Lallemand vitamin D yeast is allowed. Previously, it was allowed only in baked products and food supplements. Of the 34 categories of food in which vitamin D yeast is allowed, we're showing only 16 here, which are more relevant for our audience. Categories now include a few for infant foods, some for milk and related products, and also cereals, among others. Lallemand also has history with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. In 2009, the first food additive petition by Lallemand was submitted for the authorization of vitamin D yeast as a nutrient supplement in yeast-containing baked goods. In 2012, the FDA authorized vitamin D2 active baking yeast in yeast-leavened baked goods, baking mixes, and yeast-leavened baked snack foods at a maximum level of 400 IU per 100 grams. In 2021, a new petition was recently submitted to allow use of vitamin D yeast in its inactive form in 18 food categories. Of the 18 food categories, we are showing only 12 here. Categories now include plant-based milk and yogurt alternatives, meal replacement bars and beverages, and plant protein products. We are proud of our effort to continue to expand the categories of use for vitamin D yeast. Our main goal is always to demonstrate the safety of use of vitamin D yeast in a broad range of products. The EFSA opinion is expected to be published soon, and the EU regulation is expected to be published by the end of 2021. The FDA evaluation is in progress, and approval is expected in 2022. Market research shows that there are many opportunities for vitamin D yeast in supplements and food for the purpose of supporting immune health. Most of the data here is from before 2020. It is still too soon to get more consumer data that is directly relevant to the pandemic. But we can see that when it comes to immune health, before the pandemic, more than a third of consumers were interested in products supporting the immune system. It will be interesting to see the data that comes in the next year or so. In the EU, we see that most people already take vitamins, minerals, or supplements to improve their immune health. This indicates an understanding by the population that vitamins and minerals do have a positive effect on the immune system and a willingness of the population to take these products. Here we see that product launches claiming immunity-enhancing functional benefits have grown, but continue to represent a small portion in food and drink categories. There are definitely opportunities in these categories for functional products providing immune support. We expect to see growth in this area in upcoming years. When we look at immunity-enhancing product launches with functional claims, we can see that Europe and Asia-Pacific are very comfortable in this market and receptive to these products compared to other regions. Regardless of what actual health claims can be made in other regions, it is possible to position a product for immune health using ingredients that are permitted in these countries. We urge our audience members to reach out to us to discuss which yeast ingredients can be used for immune formulations. Here we can see that year after year, vitamins and minerals lead the way as being key ingredients in the immunity market. For us at Lallemand, vitamin D, zinc, and selenium are our star products in this area. We also offer yeast beta-glucans, which don't really fall into any category here, but have been well documented to support immune health. In summary, we hope to have demonstrated a few key points about vitamin D today. Vitamin D has been proven to support immune function, and, in the EU, there are 2 authorized health claims for support of immune function. There is compelling scientific evidence that insufficient vitamin D concentration in the blood increases the chance of COVID-19 infections, severity of infection, and probability of death. Evidence shows that low vitamin D concentrations are alarmingly common globally. Dietary supplementation is recommended to avoid serious consequences of deficiency. Lallemand vitamin D is approved in most regions. It is a natural, vegan, gluten-free, non-GMO vitamin D yeast. A total of 34 categories of use for vitamin D yeast will be permitted in the EU later this year. FDA approval of 18 food categories is expected in 2022. Market research shows strong consumer interest in immunity products and opportunities for growth in all regions, demographics, and categories. Thank you all very much for attending our webinar. We hope it has been informative and helpful. Please be sure to contact us for information and samples of our vitamin D yeast. You can reach us by email at info@bio-lallemand.com, on LinkedIn at Lallemand Bio-Ingredients, and through the website at www.bio-lallemand.com.